"Sir, your card is declined. Please step aside." The words fell flat against the hum of flickering neon lights at a roadside gas station in rural Oklahoma. Rain tapped lightly against the glass windows, each drop echoing the silence that followed. The man at the pump froze his hand tightening on the nozzle, his face expressionless. David Lawson looked like any other tired traveler on a late-night drive. Faded jeans, a plain jacket, a car that had seen better days. But the glint of a timepiece on his wrist told a different story, one that didn't belong in this forgotten stretch of highway. A low murmur rippled through the line of cars behind him. Someone muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "Unbelievable. Driving a Mercedes and can't pay $20 for gas." A couple chuckled, the sound sharp, dismissive. David swallowed, tried another card. The machine beeped. Declined. He tried a third. Same result. The tension thickened, a mixture of impatience and judgment hanging heavy in the cool night air. "Sir," the attendant repeated, shifting uncomfortably. "If you can't pay, I'll need you to move your car." A horn blared from the line. Someone shouted, "Come on, man, some of us have places to be." David exhaled slowly. He knew exactly why this was happening. His accounts hadn't dried up by accident. Someone had blocked them on purpose. He could almost feel their invisible hand tightening around his throat. Then, through the haze of embarrassment and scorn, two small voices cut through. "We can pay for him." Heads turned. From behind a dented family sedan, two little girls, no older than 8, stepped forward. Their braids swung as they walked with a surprising firmness, a small pink purse clutched between them. The coins inside jingled softly, a fragile sound against the storm of laughter and whispers. "Girls, get back here right now," a woman's voice called from the car, mortified. But the twins didn't retreat. They stopped right in front of David, lifting the purse as if it weighed more than it should. One of them, the more outspoken, cleared her throat. "We have $15.60. It's not enough, but—" She glanced at her sister, who gave a tiny nod. "Our grandma always says when someone needs help, and you can help even a little, you help." The station fell silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself leaned in to listen. David's chest tightened. For weeks he had been treated as an outcast, mocked, dismissed, erased from the empire he had built. And here, in the middle of nowhere, two children he'd never met were offering the last of their savings without hesitation. He crouched down, meeting their eyes. "What are your names?" his voice cracked. Amara said the first. Lila said the second. Amara and Lila. David whispered to himself, the words trembling on his lips. He blinked hard, but the sting in his eyes didn't fade. Behind them, people shifted uncomfortably. Some smirked at the scene, others quietly lifted their phones to record. A story was being written before anyone realized, one that would spread far beyond this gas station. David had no way of knowing that this moment, this simple act of kindness, would ignite a chain of events powerful enough to shake the foundations of an empire. And it all began here, under the harsh neon lights of a rural station, with two little girls holding a pink purse. The photo went viral before David even left the station. A grainy image captured by someone in line showed him kneeling at eye level with the girls, the pink purse between them. The caption above it read, "Bankrupt billionaire saved by children." By the time he pulled into a rundown motel on the edge of town, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Comments flooded social media, mocking, dismissive, cruel. To the world, David Lawson was no longer a man. He was a punchline. But those who laughed didn't know what had happened 3 weeks earlier in a glass tower 2,000 miles away. Back in New York, David had been the face of Cybernova Industries, a company he built from scratch. a name once synonymous with innovation, with security, with trust. His office sat on the 42nd floor overlooking the skyline. For a decade, his closest ally had been Richard Hale, a man he once called a brother. Together they had turned an idea into a multi-billion-dollar empire. And then came the discovery. Hidden deep in the system, David had found contracts he was never supposed to see. Government deals that blurred every ethical line, algorithms repurposed to watch citizens instead of serving them. It wasn't innovation. It was surveillance. Mass, silent, and invasive. When he confronted Richard, the smile on his partner's face told him everything. David Richard had said, lounging back in his Italian leather chair, "Some truths are too big for one man to carry. You want to protect people, fine. But understand, this is bigger than us. Bigger than you." 3 days later, David's keycard no longer worked. His shares had been stripped, his emails erased. Lawyers he thought were loyal stopped returning calls. Executives he had mentored now looked away in elevators. In the boardroom, Richard painted him as unstable, paranoid, unfit to lead. The story stuck, and so David Lawson disappeared. He left Manhattan with only a suitcase, a laptop, and a briefcase full of documents that could change everything. He thought anonymity would protect him. But power has a way of reaching even into the quiet corners of America. His accounts were frozen, his cards blocked, his name dragged through mud, and now in a forgotten town under buzzing neon lights, he had been forced to watch strangers laugh at his humiliation. What those strangers didn't know, what even Amara and Lila couldn't have guessed, was that David was carrying evidence capable of shaking the ground beneath Cybernova and the officials tied to it. But evidence meant nothing without credibility. And right now, credibility was the one thing he didn't have. The girl's mother had apologized endlessly as she ushered them back into their car, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. But David couldn't shake the moment. The image of two little girls offering him the last of their coins had cut deeper than Richard's betrayal, deeper than the headlines that mocked him. It reminded him of who he used to be before boardrooms and contracts swallowed his soul, before loyalty was traded for profit. Amara and Lila had shown him in a way no courtroom or headline ever could, that dignity didn't come from wealth or status. It came from the courage to act when kindness was needed most. And as David sat on the edge of a motel bed that smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, watching his reputation burn in real time on a cracked television screen, he knew one thing with absolute clarity: Richard Hale hadn't just underestimated him. He had underestimated the power of two children with a pink purse. The storm was only beginning. The first memes appeared before sunrise. A blurry screenshot of the gas station scene. David bent low before two children was already making rounds with a new caption, "From Wall Street to Wallet Empty." By noon, a remix of Amara's small voice saying, "We can pay for him," had been turned into an electronic beat shared on thousands of phones. David had been mocked before, but this was different. This was deliberate, organized. In the motel's dim room, the glow of his laptop screen painted his face pale. He scrolled through trending hashtags: billionaire, beggar, fallen CEO, cyber nova crazy. Post after post ridiculed him, twisting the moment into proof of weakness. To the public, he wasn't a whistleblower. He wasn't a man who had sacrificed everything to protect the truth. He was just a failed executive begging children for gas money. And then came the message. At 10:43 p.m., his phone buzzed with a number he knew too well. Seen the news. Disappearing didn't work, David. Some secrets are too big for one man. Accept it. Richard. David's hand tightened around the phone. The words weren't just taunts, they were warnings. Richard knew exactly where he was, what had happened. The humiliation wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Another message followed minutes later, sharper than the first niece kids, those twins. Be careful. It would be a shame if your little friends got caught in the crossfire. The blood drained from David's face. It wasn't enough for Richard to strip him of wealth, reputation, and power. Now he was reaching for the one thing David couldn't ignore: innocent lives. David shut the phone off, dropped it onto the thin motel blanket, and pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes. For years he had fought corporate battles in boardrooms where betrayal was sealed with a handshake. But this was different. Richard was stepping into a darker arena, one that placed children at risk. And David knew exactly why. The briefcase under the bed contained files, dates, transfers, contracts, evidence that tied Cybernova not just to unethical deals, but to a hidden web of politicians, contractors, and agencies. Enough to ignite a national scandal. Richard wasn't only destroying David's credibility. He was making sure no one would ever believe a word of the truth. If the public saw him as a delusional beggar, no document would matter. David paced the small room, the cheap carpet scratchy under his bare feet. Each humiliating meme, each sarcastic comment online only fueled something inside him. He could endure being stripped of titles, of fortune, of friends. But the moment Richard threatened Amara and Lila, something shifted. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. Outside, a neon sign buzzed in the distance, casting the motel window in fractured red light. David stared at it, his jaw set. The humiliation had been carefully staged. The threats were calculated. But Richard had underestimated one thing: when you try to frighten a man who has nothing left, you don't weaken him. You sharpen him. The storm was gathering, and David could already hear its rumble. The threats didn't paralyze him. They clarified him. For 3 weeks, David had been surviving in shadows, second-guessing every move, retreating further into anonymity. But after Richard's message about Amara and Lila, he knew hiding was no longer an option. If Richard was willing to use children as leverage, then silence would only invite disaster. David opened the briefcase. Inside were folders packed with contracts, receipts, and digital drives, each one a piece of a puzzle so large even he hadn't grasped its full scope when he first uncovered it. He pulled out his laptop, typed in a string of code only he knew, and watched as a dark interface bloomed across the screen. It was his failsafe. A system he had built quietly over the years, a dead man switch. Every 72 hours, unless he entered a sequence, the files would automatically send themselves to journalists across 7 countries. For now, it kept the secrets safe. But secrets locked away couldn't bring justice. He needed someone who could help bring them into the light. At 2:15 a.m., in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Dallas, the door chimed and a woman walked in. Her black hair was pulled into a loose bun, her worn backpack heavy with gear. She spotted David, immediately slid into the booth across from him, and spoke without preamble. "David Lawson, I thought you were either dead or hiding somewhere far beyond reach. Sofia Ramirez." David said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Still chasing ghosts in the dark, Sofia Ramirez was no stranger to secrets. As an investigative journalist, she had exposed corruption that toppled city officials and rattled corporate giants. 2 Pulitzer Prizes sat on her shelf back in Washington. She was respected, feared, and most importantly, she could be trusted. David pushed the briefcase toward her. "This isn't a ghost. It's a storm. And it's coming." She flipped the case open, scanning through the documents. Bank transfers routed through shell companies. confidential contracts signed with government agencies, audio recordings of closed-door meetings where policies were bought like commodities. Her sharp eyes widened with every page. David, if this is true, it's not just corruption. We're talking surveillance of citizens on a scale that violates the Constitution, manipulation of elections, blackmail of public figures. It's true. David cut in, his voice steady. Every word, every number, every signature. Richard Hale thinks I'm finished. He thinks memes and headlines will bury me. But what he doesn't know is that I've built a network. Engineers who still believe in ethics. Hackers who won't sell out. Journalists who care about truth. Sophia closed the briefcase gently, as if handling something volatile. This could take down more than a company. It could topple entire pillars of power. But you know what that means, right? They won't just fight back. They'll come after you harder. After anyone tied to you. David leaned back, his gaze unwavering. They already threatened children. That was their mistake. Now it's not just about justice. It's about protecting Amara and Lila. Protecting what's still pure in this world. The hum of the diner's fluorescent lights filled the pause between them. Sophia studied him for a long moment before nodding. Then let's make sure the truth doesn't just survive. Let's make sure it explodes. For the first time in weeks, David felt something stir inside him that had been missing resolve. He wasn't alone anymore. And the more Richard tried to erase him, the more determined he became to fight back. What Richard Hale couldn't see, what none of them saw, was that David Lawson was no longer simply defending himself. He was preparing to go on the offensive. The balance of power had begun to shift. 3 days later, the boardroom of Cybernova Tower in Chicago buzzed with anticipation. Executives in tailored suits shuffled papers, checked their phones, adjusted their ties. Outside, the city skyline gleamed under a crisp autumn sun. Inside, Richard Hale stood at the head of a polished mahogany table, every inch the confident leader. The narrative is working, he told the board, his voice smooth, assured. David Lawson has been reduced to a punchline. Public trust is up. Stock prices are climbing. By next quarter, this company will be untouchable. Laughter rippled across the room. Screens on the walls displayed graphs and metrics. Cybernova's stock up 3% since the smear campaign began. Richard basked in the glow of his success, and then all at once the phones started buzzing. First one, then another, then all at once. Executives glanced down at their screens, brows furrowing. Notifications stacked like falling dominoes. The smile on Richard's face faltered. He unlocked his phone, scrolled, and his blood ran cold. Breaking news. The Cybernova Files former CEO leaks explosive documents exposing illegal mass surveillance, election interference, and government blackmail schemes. The words stared back at him, accompanied by images, contracts, bank transfers, internal memos. Every headline carried David Lawson's name. "What is this one?" executive stammered, his voice shaking. Richard tried to steady his breathing. "It's fake. Disinformation." But then came the audio. On every newsfeed, across every screen, a single recording played, Richard's own voice, cold and unmistakable. "Nice kids, those twins. Be careful. It would be a shame if something happened to their family." The boardroom froze. Silence heavy as stone. Executives turned toward Richard, their eyes wide with horror, with disgust. "No," Richard whispered, shaking his head. That was private. That can't," but it was too late. The world had already heard. Parents across the country were furious. Comment sections flooded with outrage. Hashtags erupted. Protect the children. Cybernova Files # Justice for Amar and Lila. Across America, televisions blared with the same footage Sofia Ramirez live on air holding stacks of evidence. What you are seeing, she told the cameras, is not speculation. These are authenticated contracts, financial records, and recordings verified by independent experts. We are looking at a corporate conspiracy that spans politics, finance, and national security, and at the center of it, Cybernova. By mid-afternoon, the company's stock had plunged 42%. By evening, FBI agents were swarming Cybernova Tower serving search warrants. And somewhere in that chaos, cameras found David Lawson. He wasn't in a boardroom or a courtroom. He was standing outside a modest elementary school in Oklahoma where Amara and Lila studied. The children laughed on the playground behind him, oblivious to the storm their kindness had unleashed. David's voice, calm but steady, cut through the noise of reporters shouting questions. 3 weeks ago, I lost everything I thought mattered: power, money, reputation. But then 2 children reminded me what truly matters: courage, compassion, and truth. They gave me $15.60, and in return, I found a reason to fight again. I will not let their kindness be twisted into a weapon. Not by anyone. The clip went viral within hours. For the first time, the narrative wasn't about a fallen billionaire. It was about 2 little girls who had sparked a national reckoning. Richard Hale, meanwhile, was led out of Cybernova Tower in handcuffs, the press swarming like vultures. His once confident stride was gone, replaced by a hollow stare. Every camera caught the moment, every headline immortalized his fall. But David wasn't watching the chaos unfold on television. He was in a quiet office with Sofia securing backups, coordinating with allies, making sure every leak was impossible to bury. He knew this wasn't just about Richard. It was about dismantling an entire network that had thrived in shadows. Still, the symbolic victory mattered. The world had seen the truth. The powerful had been exposed. And it all began with 2 little girls holding a pink purse. For David, that was enough to keep fighting. The showdown wasn't the end. It was the beginning. By the time the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, Cybernova was crumbling. News anchors reported every development in real time: stock prices, free-falling investors pulling out, offices raided by federal agents. Overnight, a corporation once valued in the billions became a symbol of greed and betrayal. Richard Hale sat in the back of a black SUV, wrists cuffed, face pale. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, their voices overlapping. "Mr. Hale, did you order surveillance on private citizens? Did you threaten children?" He kept his head down, but the cameras didn't need his words. The image spoke for itself. For David, the fallout wasn't measured in dollars or prison sentences. It was in the shift of public perception. No longer was he the #billionaire beggar. Now he was the man who had exposed one of the largest corruption schemes in modern history. But he didn't smile. His vindication didn't feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like responsibility. At a press conference held not in a skyscraper, but in a modest community hall in Oklahoma, David announced the creation of the Amara and Lila Foundation. The mission was simple yet profound. Protect whistleblowers, provide legal and financial aid to those who dared to speak out, and shield the innocent from being weaponized by the powerful. The girl's mother, Monica Johnson, stood beside him, her hands resting on her daughter's shoulders. Cameras captured the moment as Amara whispered shyly into the microphone, "We just wanted to help. That's all." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't the applause of shareholders or politicians. It was the applause of ordinary people who saw in 2 children the courage to do what so many adults had forgotten: to act simply because it was right. Within weeks, donations poured in. Lawyers, journalists, and everyday citizens offered their skills and resources. What began as a foundation quickly grew into a movement. Schools invited Amara and Lila to speak about kindness. National magazines featured them on covers under headlines like, "Little Heroes, Big Change." Meanwhile, Richard's allies abandoned him one by one. Board members resigned. Political figures distanced themselves. Friends stopped answering his calls. The empire he thought was indestructible had collapsed, not under the weight of competitors, but under the weight of his own arrogance. David, however, chose no revenge tours, no gloating interviews. Instead, he poured his energy into building something sustainable. His office wasn't in Manhattan anymore. It was a small building in Austin, Texas, overlooking a colorful playground. On his desk sat a framed photo, Amara and Lila holding hands, smiling, the pink purse still visible in the background. Each time he looked at it, he remembered his second chance wasn't born out of power or strategy. It was born out of kindness offered by two children who had nothing to gain. As the weeks stretched into months, the ripples spread further. Whistleblowers came forward from across industries: healthcare, finance, defense. Each new revelation proved the same truth: corruption thrived in silence, but crumbled under light. And every time a case broke, people whispered the same names: Amara and Lila. The gas station incident, once a source of ridicule, had become the catalyst for change. What was meant to humiliate David had instead elevated him to a purpose larger than himself. And as autumn turned to winter, he often found himself thinking of the moment it all began: the rain, the neon lights, the laughter of strangers. Out of all that darkness, two voices had cut through, steady and clear. "We can pay for him." It was no longer a memory of shame. It was a memory of hope. 6 months later, a chilly spring breeze swept through Austin. From his modest office window, David Lawson could hear the laughter of children echoing from the playground across the street. Red, yellow, and blue swings creaked under the weight of carefree joy. Among the children, two familiar figures darted between the slides, Amara and Lila, braids bouncing as they raced each other to the top. David leaned back in his chair, letting the sound wash over him. On his desk sat a simple frame, a worn dollar bill, and a handful of coins carefully preserved behind glass. $15.60. To most, it was pocket change. To him, it was the moment his life had been given back. The Grace and Hope Foundation, named not for wealth, but for the values those coins represented, had already processed over 200 whistleblower cases in its first year. Corrupt officials faced trials, corporations paid billion-dollar fines, and for the first time in decades, ordinary people felt that truth had a fighting chance. But David knew the true legacy wasn't in the headlines or the prosecutions. It was in the way Amara and Lila had become symbols of something larger. They appeared on talk shows not as celebrities, but as reminders. Their small voices carried wisdom. Adults often forgot kindness is not weakness. It is strength. One evening during an award ceremony where the twins were honored as Young Citizens of the Year, a reporter asked them if they understood how much they had changed. Lila had simply shrugged her eyes wide with innocence. "We just helped because he needed help," she said. That line was replayed 1,000,000 times, quoted in schools, written on posters. Because he needed help. David carried those words with him everywhere. They were a compass, steadying him whenever doubt threatened to return. Richard Hale, once the face of Cybernova, now sat behind bars. His name faded from memory, remembered not for triumph, but for betrayal. In the end, his empire had vanished while the gesture of two children had grown into something indestructible. As twilight settled, David stepped outside watching Amara and Lila play. They spotted him and waved. He raised his hand in return, a a quiet smile touching his face. In that moment, he understood the real wealth he had been given. It wasn't measured in billions. It was measured in courage, shared in dignity, reclaimed in innocence, protected. The world would remember the Cybernova scandal as a story of corruption exposed. But David would remember it as something far simpler. The night 2 children with a pink purse taught him that the smallest act of kindness could spark a revolution of justice. And long after boardrooms, headlines, and courtrooms faded into history, the sound of their voices would remain 2 little girls saying clear and unshaken, "We can pay for him." True wealth is never measured in dollars or titles, but in the courage to do what's right when no one is watching. This story reminds us that kindness, no matter how small, can ripple outward to change lives and even challenge systems built on power and fear. In a world that often rewards arrogance and silence, 2 little girls proved that integrity and compassion are stronger than intimidation. It is a call for us to face injustice, to recognize the quiet dignity within ourselves, and to remember that a candle loses nothing by lighting another. What about you? Have you witnessed a moment of unexpected kindness that changed the way you see the world? Share your thoughts in the comments like this video if it touched you, and subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the strength of the human spirit. Wishing you peace, courage, and hope today and always.